I was halfway down the aisle when I realized half the people who'd RSVP'd to our wedding had two things in common. They'd never smiled with their eyes in any of their social photos, and they all arrived without last names, just initials neat as bullets on place cards. By the time I reached Lena, the woman who swore she loved me, who had once traced "I love you" on my back with the nail of her pinky while we stood in line for coffee, I had already counted 6 men whose cufflinks matched the same obscure crest engraved on our invitation wax seal. A crest Lena had called Heritage Don't Tease, and I felt the cold clarity that comes right before a storm, where every sound is sharp and every color is truer than honest. She lifted her veil and I forgot to breathe. Hazel eyes with gold spokes, a mouth that folded into a grin like a secret. But when her fingers tightened around mine, a coded squeeze, squeeze, squeeze that meant look left from a game we played in the grocery store to dodge an X. I obeyed and saw the best man, Rafe, ex-military, the one who couldn't stand still, lean toward the wedding planner and whisper something that made her clipboards tremble. If you press your ear to a moment, you can hear its future, and the future of ours sounded like the click of a safety coming off. We said our vows with our voices almost steady, and when the officiant told me to kiss the bride, she whispered into my mouth, "Noah, trust me," as if she knew exactly how fast I was tallying the wrongness around us. A florist who didn't know a ranunculus from a rose, but had forearms like a dock worker. A photographer who never shot the kiss, only the exits. A string quartet that stopped between movements not to retune but to listen. We reached the reception, and I discovered the second thing about our guests. They had all insisted on paper invitations instead of evites, and the calligrapher's flourishes hid tiny dots of colored ink by each name. Dots I'd assumed were printer flecks. Only now I watched the maitre d' people by that palette like a field medic triaging the wounded. Lena laughed on cue when my mother clinked her glass, and when she turned her head, I saw how the diamond in her earring wasn't a diamond at all, but a micro-transceiver. "Dance with me," she said. And we stepped into a slow circle under chandeliers that looked like frozen rain, her cheek gliding past mine. The perfume she wore bright with citrus like the start of an idea. "You swear you love me?" I said, trying to make it a tease and failing. "I swore it before I knew it would matter," she answered, and a strip of silence snapped taut between us. The first red herring balanced on the rim of a champagne flute, my Aunt Val's to be exact, because when she set it down, a glimmer at the base caught my eye, a sliver of metal the size of a baby tooth. I knelt, palming it as if tying my shoe, and felt the burn of a tiny transmitter. Who, exactly, did someone need to track at a wedding where the guest list was curated like a museum of expensive ghosts? The second red herring arrived with the band's third song when Rafe cut in, clasped my shoulder, and pulled me off the floor with the controlled force of a man who'd trained to break doors, not hearts. "Walk," he said without smiling, and I did, because I have the survival instinct of a cat in a room with too many rocking chairs. In the hallway between the ballroom and the kitchen, where steam made the air taste like salt and steel, he said, "You need to know something about Lena." And I almost laughed because of course I needed to know something about Lena, starting with who exactly had taught her to hold a knife like that when she sliced an apple at breakfast. "Not here," Lena said from behind us, appearing like a mirror suddenly hung at the end of a long corridor. She took my hand, her palm cool, and tugged me into the service elevator whose walls remembered 1,000 trays of creme brulee and gossip. As the door shushed shut, she hit the emergency stop and the car sighed to a halt between floors. "Before you ask, I didn't invite your boss's wife," she said, and the absurd specificity of it made me blink. "But I did seat your boss next to the man who launders his campaign donations." And then she touched my cheek with the backs of her fingers like a doctor taking the temperature of a fever dream. "Noah, our wedding guest list is a hit list, but not the way you think. They're not here to kill us, they're here to be taken." And suddenly the crest on the invitations, the colored dots, the paper insistence made a new kind of sense. This wasn't a party, it was a net. The midpoint twist is the moment you realize the room you thought was a trap is actually a stage. "I work with Treasury's illicit finance task force," Lena said, words smooth but fragile. "Deep cover on a consortium that moves weapons through maritime art shipments. They needed a social event to congregate without suspicion. I needed a reason for all of them to be in one place at one time with their guards down. Weddings are the last honest parties left. Nobody expects the bride." I wanted that to be the end of the explanation, but the look on Rafe's face said there was a second act. "He's my handler," Lena added, and that should have reassured me, yet the angle of Rafe's jaw suggested a compromise like a hairline crack in a dam. Why tell me now? I asked, helplessly petty. Because in 90 seconds, 3 men at table 7 will stand. Leave separately and converge in the east corridor. And if you're not in the bridal suite by then, pretending to be surprised by a gift, you will be between them and their bagman, she said, not blinking, and I remembered the colored dots. The dots? I asked. Priority tiers, she said, and then kissed me quick and fierce, a seal, a brand. We started the elevator, and as we rose, the power died, a hum that thinned to nothing, and the lights flickered like uncertainty before the emergency bulbs came on in a mean, humming yellow. That wasn't the building, Rafe said, pulling a compact flashlight from nowhere like a magician with a moral code. That was someone cutting the ballroom from the grid. They want chaos without cameras. We're moving. The doors pried open onto a floor that smelled like hairspray and white roses, the upstairs suite corridor, and Lena ran, barefoot now, her shoes in her hand like sling stones. Inside the suite, gifts towered in polite mountains, and a velvet box waited on the bed with a note in my mother's handwriting. Lena flung open the closet. Behind the gowns hung a wall safe. Behind the safe, a grate. Behind the grate, a dark that breathed cold. Rafe, get the bag, she said. And to me, do you remember the night you spilled wine on my dress and I didn't flinch? You looked like you'd practiced not flinching, I said, which was the wrong joke for the moment. It was the day my cover swallowed my name, she said simply, and then handed me a small, hard object wrapped in satin. A ceramic coin, black, nested in fleece. That's a burner key, Rafe said. It'll arm a decoy in the freight bay. Whoever's pulling the string thinks it's access to the hotel vault. When they plug it in, it'll ping every alphabet soup agency within a mile and leave them with a very loud piece of modern art that cries when you shake it. We call it the baby. You want me to carry that? I said, and Lena's eyes flicked to my mouth as if to memorize the way my fear-shaped words. I want you to leave, she said, and it hit me so hard I stepped back. I want you to take the service stairs to the alley and get in a taxi and go home to your old key under the fern pot and your red kettle and your neighbor who plays trumpet badly and forget you married me today. It was selfish to ask, she added, the way a person covers their heart with their palm when the weather changes. I didn't move. Sometimes love isn't the bright yes, but the refusal to leave the room. No, I said, just as the suite door opened and the hotel manager, the one with the kind eyes, came in carrying a tray and a gun. His smile was apologetic, like a waiter who'd run out of specials. Mrs. Hale, he said to Lena, using a name I'd never heard. The groom will come with me, and this will be cleaner. And I realized the third thing about our guest list. A hit list is also leverage. Take one hostage and the rest fold like napkins. The dark night of the soul is not always midnight. Sometimes it's the space between the last sentence you believed and the first one that breaks you. You swore you loved me, I said to Lena, hearing how small it sounded, and she flinched for the first time all day. I do, she said, and because I believed her, I did the cruelest thing I could think of to save her. I looked at the manager and said, You'll only get cooperation if I see proof she's safe. And when he nudged me toward the door, I went, hating myself with every step. Rafe moved, too slow, hand empty, and Lena didn't. Her stillness was a weapon I hadn't recognized. In the service corridor, the air narrowed, the manager's hand steady at my spine. We turned right, then left, then right again, down into the hotel's skeleton where pipes sweated and the carpet gave up and floors turned to concrete pocked from old repairs. You love her, he said conversationally, as if we were in an Uber. That's going to make you a hero or a ghost. Most men overestimate their hero quotient. And because he needed me talkative, I asked questions about the consortia, about art crates, about donor lists, and his answers came loose around the edges. And I filed them because every lie is a breadcrumb. We reached the freight bay, and the manager gestured at a metal pedestal with a slot the exact size of the ceramic coin. Do it, he said, and I thought of Lena's hands over a map of seating arrangements, saying I moved the centerpieces because the room was lopsided, which at the time meant nothing and now meant don't touch the obvious center. I slid the coin in. The pedestal hummed. Heartbeat. Heartbeat. Then a soft chime that sounded like a child's toy. Thank you, he said, and for a second I saw him as he might have been, weary, bad at being bad. And then the bay door crashed open and a shadow stepped through and Rafe tackled me sideways as 3 shots turned the pedestal into bright confetti. The manager went down with surprise on his face and a crimson that threatened to break our PG rating but didn't. Smoke smelled like pennies. Rafe dragged me behind a crate, pressed a headset into my palm. "You still in?" he asked, and I said, "Because fear and love sharpen you, tell me where to run." "Up," he said, and I ran, reversing the labyrinth into a version that led toward light. Upstairs, the ballroom had dissolved into disciplined chaos. Waiters herding civilians, the band silent, my mother holding my father's hand in a way that would break me later. Lena stood at the center like the calm eye of a mean storm, her hair half tumbled, a smudge on her cheek like war paint. 3 men were on the floor in zip ties, 2 more in a cluster by the bar arguing with bland men in navy suits who said things like, "Sir, and it's over." When Lena saw me, her relief hit so hard it made me angry that I doubted her, and sad that we had made a vow in a room full of ghosts. "It isn't over," I told her, because I had heard the manager say a name, Sorrel, that didn't match anyone present. "Where's Sorrel?" I asked, and she said, "He won't come inside. He likes to watch his work from a distance." And the words were so careful I knew she had just given me our next move. On the balcony, the night had wiped its mouth and started over. Rain fizzed in the hotel lights. Beyond the hedges, the valet line glittered with cars like patient sharks. "There," I said, pointing at the sedan with the engine running and the gut feeling that hits you like a bell. Lena touched her earring, whispered, "Northeast hedge, sedan with no ticket, pull the plate." And in my headset, someone repeated numbers and letters that meant we were right.
"We flush him?"
Rafe asked from somewhere too close to a bad idea. "We starve him," Lena said, and the lights in the valet loop went out like a string of beads pulled hard. Sorrel panicked in slow motion. A door opened, a shadow slid, and then a second door. And then the hedge itself seemed to reach for him. Men from Treasury and somewhere even duller tackled the night until it had a face and a wallet. I thought that would be the end, but endings require a price, and ours arrived as a scream from the ballroom that cut everything clean. I pivoted into a sprint and found my mother on the floor, gasping, and my father kneeling, helpless, and a slim glass vial rolling toward my shoe from where one of the consortium men had flung it in the chaos. A last spiteful act. Aerosolized tear gas. Not lethal, but in a crowded room with 2 elderly hearts, a thing that could break a family. Without thinking, without planning, I did the small sacrificial math of love. I kicked the vial under the dessert table where the linens hung low, dove under with it, wrapped it in the tablecloth, and shoved it into the ice bucket where I held it down. Face a breath away, eyes burning, lungs a nest of bees. The pain was clean and then not. The world a smear, and when hands pulled me up into air, I was crying and laughing like someone who'd chosen and survived. Lena was there, palm on my cheek, saying, "You idiot, you beautiful idiot," which is a kind of vow. And my mother was sitting up, fanning herself with the menu like a queen for giving a court. And the room had started to applaud because people like to clap when they know where the danger is. The fair play reveal came as the agents rolled out whiteboards and explained to the stunned non-criminals that they had just attended a sting, and to the criminal plus ones that they had detained pages of payroll under the same roof as a buttercream cake. The colored dots were recovered, the crest traced to a shell non-profit. The calligrapher turned out to be an undercover forger who'd been swapping inks for data capture microdots. Every detail I'd noticed but not believed slotted into place with terrible elegance. The florist's arms, former Coast Guard. The photographer's blind spot blocked his face from every camera so facial recognition scrapers couldn't ID him later. The string quartet's pauses, timed to door openings so a boom mic could log who entered on which note. At 82% of the night, if hearts have percentages, the last of the guests were shepherded out, the criminals in quiet cuffs, my father telling my mother a bad joke he'd told her the day they eloped, a loop closing. Rafe leaned against the door, looked at me without the usual sarcasm, and said, "She chose you anyway," which was the only blessing I needed from him. When the ballroom emptied and the chandeliers dimmed to a kind of private moonlight, Lena and I stood on the dance floor that still remembered the weight of our first waltz. I realized I had a choice I'd been carrying since the moment she said, "Trust me, forgive the necessary lies or keep them between us like a low wall we'd always trip over." "I can live without the fairy tale," I said, reaching for her hand, "but I won't live without the truth. Tell me next time before the world ends." And she laughed in that way where the laugh is half a sob and nodded. "I will," and then added, "No more code names. No more secrets that have your face on them." And I realized she was making the same promise back. We kissed then, finally, properly. Not the way you kiss in front of people who clap, but the way you kiss when you've nearly lost the thing that carries your name through a room. It tasted like salt and relief and a future I could imagine without holding my breath. The band, still on payroll, struck up something slow without being asked, and we swayed because our bodies knew the steps better than our minds did. "You swore you loved me," I reminded her against her ear. "I swear again," she said, and this time I believed the tense of it, the ongoing, not the completed. Outside, the valet lights came back to life. Inside, the cake had somehow survived with a slice missing where Rafe had apparently paid himself in sugar. Later, much later, when we were finally alone in a suite that had been swept twice and blessed once by my mother's superstition, Lena took off the transceiver earrings and set them in a dish like two spent ideas. I poured water. She took my hand. "I have one wedding gift for you," she said, opening the velvet box I'd ignored in the crisis. Inside was a house key, not to my place or hers, but to a third address scribbled on a tag, an apartment on a street we'd once walked past and both said, at the same time, "Nice bay windows." "I paid the deposit yesterday," she said, suddenly shy, and I couldn't remember the last time anyone had given me a future wrapped in a door. We curled on the couch and watched dawn test the curtains, and when the light found us, I felt the peculiar peace of having been hunted and then chosen, of learning that love is not the lack of danger, but the decision to stand between it and the person you want to feed breakfast to for as long as you both wake up. She swore she loved me. Our wedding guest list was a hit list. We turned the list into a ledger and balanced it with a kiss. It turns out a marriage can begin in the middle of a crime and still end with a life where you split the last strawberry respectfully in half.